Who's this cat for the Ringer? I like him. First of all, you read people's material and you see some things that are done, and then when you see him in person, I guess in person best we can talk about is on a podcast. This guy, what's his name? Kevin O'Connor with the Ringer.
Yeah, he rocks. KOC.
Yeah, man, he really does. Sat down with Victor. We saw a tweet last week, kind of jumped around. Finally got a chance to see it over the weekend. An hour of Victor. Takeaways initially for those that saw it and you, RJ, about who Victor is in your mind after a full season and what was a remarkably in-depth and really interesting conversation between the two.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with this on Friday. It was really cool to just see Wemby be so relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest takeaway is, so there was another Wemby interview that I watched recently. It was a few months ago now. I don't know if you saw, he sat down with Connor Bedard, the number one pick in the NHL draft. And they kind of talked to each other about, like, so what's it like being the prodigy in your sport? You know what I mean? Like, it was a really interesting sort of thing. And I read this really deep kind of assessment of Bedard's rookie season with the Blackhawks. And it talked about how he, is 18 years old and how he, went to his like teammate's house for dinner and his teammate's like 34 years old and how it was like super weird how he was like closer in age to the guy's kids and, to his actual teammate and stuff. But everybody kind of came away talking about Connor saying, well, this dude's just like obsessed with hockey. Like this dude, like, when he's not playing, like he's practicing longer than all. Like he's just obsessed. He's reading about hockey. He's just, all he wants to do is talk about hockey. He just loves it. And that was kind of my takeaway from Wemby here is like, this dude just loves basketball. And not even, I don't mean like loves the discipline and loves the craft. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but it's clear that he's just like obsessed with basketball and he finds it to be fun and interesting, among other things that he finds to be fun and interesting. And so it was a cool, I think we thought that already.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a cool, confirmation of the idea that this dude just doesn't care to do much in life except, play basketball, read an interesting novel that challenges his imagination, and wake up and do it all over again.
When you've been around the mic and watched the Spurs for as long as I have, this is my third next. Watching David Robinson arrive and getting to know him as a young player in the Naval Academy and fresh out of spending some time on sub duty, he arrived, got to know him. And, we were watching him early in his career playing the saxophone and playing the keyboards and doing mathematical, differential equations on the grease board in the locker room, doing, David Robinson stuff, where you could tell basketball just took a very small percentage of his brain, that most of it was dedicated to things that truly challenged him mentally. But physically, it was 100% of his body, and he was just gifted. And then there was Tim, who had the, in person, he had the Caribbean mentality, man. He was chill. He was funny until he hit the court and he was an assassin. And then, that the melding of the two. And Wemby, it's hard to imagine a more interesting. He's both these guys. He's very thoughtful. And the depth of his thought process for a kid his age, it astounded me. There was not a question that Kevin brought up that was not pondered before answered. Think about that.
Not only not pondered, but not, a lot of guys, I mean, you've interviewed a lot of people. A lot of guys are just kind of going through the motions. A lot of guys are kind of, hey, how much longer we got here? I think a lot of people, what they like about Hot Ones, which is the wing eating challenge.
It forces you to answer the question because your brain's trying to handle the heat,
Right. But so that show is designed to your point, to get people's defense mechanisms lowered. And the questions that Sean Evans has for them are really thoughtful. Like, he's such a great interviewer, and he's constantly commended for that. And I'm not saying Kevin O'Connor isn't a great interviewer, but Wemby was just, I mean, there were no short answers with him. There were no, Yes, there was nothing simple and to the point. It was a completely casual, lax thing. And I think that that's also what I find to be endearing about him is, he sat down for this hour-long interview and completely and totally opened himself up to talk shop.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no problem with any other media property, but it wasn't on the shop. It wasn't on this
Right.
massive podcast or something that's like known for this or whatever. It was just like, I feel like doing this one day, and he went ahead and did it. And he's very the whole thing was emblematic, I think, of how down to earth he is, and it was cool to see him do that.
Two things. One, he was not allowed, but was not dissuaded from doing that, which is kind of the not the Spurs typical thing. The free and easy hour-long podcast into the workings of practice and your plans and all that kind of stuff. That's just not common for
Right.
Spurs types, and that's both by personality of the type of people they bring in, and by just general attitude around the building. I do appreciate what you said, that it wasn't some masterful, highly produced on the shop.
Right.
We're going to break it with little Jimmy talking about who's taking talents. This is one of those things. It was just him sitting with a mic, and it looked like a little podcast kind of room and talking. His absolute obsession with basketball is not surprising. I mean, you don't get this good this early. I don't care how tall you are without living it and dreaming it 25 hours a day. So, but there is another part of him. And I do think that sometimes his introspection is because English is a second language. So he has to kind of, what am I going to say? Let's find the words that go English to French. And I think that his depth of, I don't want to, he has a depth of language that I do appreciate. The words are very much influenced, and he understands that. And that is, to me, for a young kid, is just the most remarkable part about him. Just you think a lot.
There was another art. I had a massive reading weekend, and caught up on a lot of things that I had bookmarked and saved and things like this. And there was this article in The Athletic about NHL players and what language they think in,
right?
Because they speak so many languages, and they interact with players from all over the world in different countries. And so it talked about how, like, when they're playing with Swedish players, they speak in Swede, and when they're playing with Czech players, they speak in Czech, and they just kind of fall in and out of English and Swedish or whatever the case may be, kind of based on circumstances. And it was interesting to kind of hear like what they scream in, like during the game, like, and whatever. So to your point, but they all talked about, like, I have to. There was a quote from one player who did an interview in English, and then the Swedish reporters came up, and he literally said, "Hold up, I have to reset my brain." And so there is some of that, I think, with Wemby. Like, he's a naturally thoughtful person, and then he has to, kind of, I don't want to say translate, every single time, but he's very measured with how he speaks, and he's very purposeful with how he speaks. Did you see his Instagram post over the weekend? Because it was one of my favorite Instagram posts of the year, and I'll say that already.
I saw a variety. Him messing around in a garden, which I'd rather him not hold a garden implement in his hand, but that's good for him. But
so he posted a sequence of photos, and he captioned it "Year 1 #first form," and there's just different photos from the season. Everything's kind of cool, right? Whatever, blah blah. One of the photos is him blocking Giannis, which is super cool.
Yeah.
But near the end of the post, the final two photos, I'll show you this one. This was him and Pop.
Oh yeah, I've got him up. I'm looking at him.
Okay, and the very next photo is Luke with Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, he envisions himself to be Luke Skywalker and Pop to be his Yoda.
Oh, does that give you like a warm feeling? Like, I just had a warm caldo on a cold day.
Yeah, find me the person that looks at their professional sporting career like that, through that lens, through that prism. I mean, he's one of one. I mean, it's very, very, very cool to kind of learn more about him and how he views things.
The rest of the NBA certainly paid notice, and he wasn't shy. Yeah, guys, call me. Yeah, don't you like that?
I mean, let's be cool. Don't get anybody in trouble.
We can't tamper.
But yeah, I mean, how could people not? How could people not want to be around this and be a part of it?
Well, Trae Young, rumors have out there, and I'm certainly not surprised. He might want to stay, and Atlanta might want to keep him. That's no shock, but that's just early in the game.
Look, there are also, and I'll ask you to pick based on the two most popular rumors right now.
Uh-huh.
Would you rather trade for Trae Young or, presuming he hits free agency, sign Chris Paul?
Well, Chris Paul would be cheap and easy. It's
I
not an
know,
either
but
or here.
would
I
it
get the
make a
sense,
difference?
I talked about it before. I get the sense that Chris Paul and the Spurs would be a good match, and I have no problem with it at all. But it won't be expensive.
I mean,
I think it would be an ideal get. There was a time, and there's been a lot of guys that have come through, and this is certainly not the same. But Speedy Claxton came through at a time when we needed a little bit more of a veteran sense. We had Mario Ellie here when Avery Johnson was here, when we need a little bit more of a veteran sense, a guy who'd been around the block and had seen some things. I can go even before that, when Pop was in his full point guard killer stage back in the late 90s, where we were cycling through. He went and got a couple of old dudes to kind of hold down from Mo Cheeks to Darnell Valentine back in the day. Having old point guards, Pop likes that. And this is one of the best old ones to ever come around the pike. And a guy who's pretty desperate for a title and certainly understands Lob City. So there's some merit to bringing him in. He's never been my favorite guy personally, but professionally, I think he's been stellar, and I'd like to see him in silver and black. I'm down.
CP3, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, CP3. He'd be cheap, mid-level kind of guy. He wouldn't break the bank, and I think he'd come in with the right kind of mindset and understanding about exactly what his position would be. And man, oh man, you think about the dumb turnovers; those would end fast with him on the court.
Maybe.
You're right, Goldfinger. Sorry.
I'm just not like overwhelmed with the idea.
Oh no, this is a bit part piece player. I'm not talking, this is not a big deal, but if we're looking at an offseason where the Spurs might be sitting on their hands and counting their money, and waiting for the next opportunity, it wouldn't surprise me that Chris Paul, it might be the signature get, even though it's really not that big of a deal. It'll just be about it was the first of many. But to see Chris Paul land and not a lot else change over the offseason other than the draft would not be a huge shock.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he's the guy who breaks the dam,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, like long term, but it does, even like the analogy isn't perfect, but it does feel a little bit like, Rob, we don't need Trae Young. We have Trae Young at home, and that's Chris Paul. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, again, not that he's currently at home, but it would definitely be a settlement. And I understand if Trae Young's not the swing you want to take, but this isn't a swing either.
It's a backup. And you're right, Goldfinger. Yeah, he can't stay healthy, but if he was to miss weeks at a time, he ain't here to win games. He is here to bring up the rest of the squad and to help win games when apparent. But his merit will be in practice, on the plane, how he handles himself, the demeanor he offers as a current and ongoing big-time media star, and how he's handled himself with pretty much, as RJs like to say, a plum. That would not be a bad get at all. Now, like I said, personally, I've never really liked the guy, but his persona's been softened with his Allstate commercials or what was it? Allstate, State Farm, it doesn't matter. State Farm. But as far as getting guys, I'm starting to doubt that this is going to be too busy, especially on the heels of the Trae Young might be staying there. Now, again, that's early in the process. There's a long time between here and there. But
yeah, I mean, we're one game into the playoffs.
But I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't shock you, would it, if Atlanta was to come out and say, "Hell no, we ain't moving him." He's kind of like their Dak Prescott. Like, okay, yeah, I know he hadn't won a lot, but he's won enough.
I will say, as far as CP3 goes, I know that we don't put a lot of stock into the San Antonio's a flyover town thing, blah blah blah. Like, just listen to Wendy talk about the city, blah blah blah. If that's real, if there are NBA players who view San Antonio that way, I think it would be good for the rep to have Chris Paul. You know what I'm saying? Like, CP3 comes in and he provides. I mean, look, I wouldn't say my point isn't that Chris Paul has wildly transformed franchises, but Chris Paul goes to Oklahoma City, becomes a little bit more serious.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Chris Paul goes to Phoenix, becomes really serious. You know what I'm saying? Obviously Golden State didn't need that help, but and San Antonio doesn't need that help from a legacy standpoint. But I do think that he is a bit of of a catalyst in
Mhm.
terms of he's a very popular player. You know what I mean? And so and he's a widely respected player. And so I think that he could be, it could be your path to a great beyond, which is what we're looking for, obviously.